Hi, everyone. My name is John Bristowe, and I'd like to welcome you to this 101 series featuring Octopus Deploy. This is basically a place where you can learn Octopus. If this is the first time you've ever seen Octopus, it's a great place for you to learn how Octopus works, why it does what it does, and how you can incorporate it as part of your deployment pipelines. Before I begin, I just want to remind folks this is a live webinar, so feel free to submit your comments, your questions, let us know where you're joining from. Love to hear where any problems you have that you'd like me to address in this webinar. I'll answer them live. In addition to that, I also want to let folks know that given the fact that this is a live webinar, there's lots of resources for me to share with you. And so with that being said, if you're at all curious, you can take a look at our resources. You can find these over at our website, which is at octopus.com. There you'll see a website that looks like this. Shiny new website. We've just redesigned it. It looks awesome. And so you can check it out there. There is a location to find all of our webinars, which is at /webinars. And there you'll see a page that looks like this. And you can see we're hosting the 101s right now. Later on the 18th, we're going to be hosting Liam, who's going to give us a brief overview, about an hour or so, of his white paper that he recently wrote called Kubernetes Delivery Unlocked, where he'll go into all the deep details and tips and tricks around doing deployments to Kubernetes clusters. So check that out. You can sign up right now. Again, that's at /webinars. We have a bunch of other resources we'll check out during this this webinar, but don't worry, I'll make sure to cite them all as we go through it. So again, let us know where you're joining from. I can see, oh, we got folks here from India. That's awesome. I'm sure we got lots of folks watching from all over the world. We've had folks from places like Sweden, Canada, and US during these 101s, so it's awesome to see. Nice. We got the UK in the house. Great to see you, Chris. Awesome. So, like I said, this is a webinar that's designed to help you understand what is Octopus, what it's all about, etc., and kind of give you a primer on Octopus itself to get a sense of what it's built for and how to use it. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. If you need to reach me, you can reach me at this email address. Feel free to just ping me. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. All right, so in this webinar, I'm going to be talking about a few things, but the four key things we're going to be talking about is what it is, what is Octopus, and more importantly, why it does what it does and why you should consider using it. Secondly, we'll talk about some fundamentals around Octopus. So we're going to talk about things like projects and deployment processes and releases. These and other terms you'll hear me describe in the context of Octopus during this webinar. And those terms are really important because they actually allow us to describe how we go about constructing a deployment pipeline. The third thing you'll see is how to create a deployment process from scratch. And that's really the lifeblood of Octopus itself, the steps that comprise a deployment process. And then finally, we'll talk about how you can trigger a deployment in an automation context through what's called a CI server or process. CI stands for continuous integration. It's basically a process by which you test and build code. And typically, after you've done that step, you'll pass it on to some other autonomous service or process to do a deployment or other things as well. And that's typically where you hand control over to a solution like Octopus. And so that's where we'll talk about how we do this in an automation context. Sound good? If you have any questions, feel free to submit them to the comments. All right, so Octopus is really easy to understand here. So on the left, you have your coders. On the right, you have the targets that you're trying to deploy to. And most folks will understand this. Like, you're going to write a bunch of code. You're going to produce a bunch of binaries and assets and packages. Those are going to be produced through a bunch of CI processes. You can see I'm listed here on the left. Things like GitHub, GitLab, TeamCity, Jenkins, you name it, BuildKite. There's tons and tons of solutions out there. Somewhere in the middle there, you're going to utilize a solution like Octopus Deploy to do the deployments. Now, you may wonder, what's wrong with using these sort of all-in-one solutions? Well, we'll get to that in a second, but basically, to summarize, these all-in-one solutions don't do a really good job over the spectrum of continuous delivery. They kind of leave it as an afterthought. They focus on build and integration really, really well, but deployments and the notion of things like environments and deployment processes and releases and rollbacks and the auditing capabilities and all that stuff kind of gets lost in the mix. And so that's really where Octopus excels. Now, to kind of make this kind of more clear, or maybe less clear, depending on how you look at this slide, on the left-hand side, you have sort of your own DIY shadow CD processes all set up. You have a bunch of scripts going in all kinds of different directions. And essentially what you have to do here is basically roll your own continuous delivery. With Octopus Deploy, we taxonomize all of that into formalized concrete structures, things like projects, environments, runbooks, hosts, variables, etc. And then we allow you to structure those into a series of deployment processes through, it's basically a collection of steps. Steps are like, do this, do this, do this, do this, in order to do a deployment. That's essentially what Octopus does. Along the way, there's other things that you can do as well. But fundamentally, with Octopus Deploy, it gives you an ability to scale out your deployment pipelines, which is really critical. In a simple world where things are easy to understand and you've got just point A, point B, point C, yes, you can roll your own scripts. You can do your own continuous delivery. But as you consider things like tenanted deployments or different versions of different apps going out to different people, or rollbacks or deployment patterns like blue, green, canary, etc., it's really important to use a solution like Octopus. You do not want to implement that yourselves. It's really gnarly. Taking this a little bit step further, you can think of, prior to utilizing Octopus, it may look something like this. This may actually look similar to what you have to do today. So on the left-hand side, like I said in the previous slide, you have your developers producing code through CI processes and servers. You have a notion of continuous delivery through custom scripts. And let's be honest, a lot of heavy lifting on your end. Typically for folks on the DevOps teams, they have to write a lot of this stuff and maintain it. You have this hodgepodge of environments that you maintain, and you have different configs, and you're using Terraform to stand up infrastructure, and you've got a bunch of tools in the mix for doing Kubernetes cluster management through kubectl, for example. You've got environment variables. You've got a bunch of stuff kind of scattered all over your infrastructure, and it's really hard to manage. And so it becomes a really, really difficult prospect. With Octopus Deploy, what we try and do is we try and simplify that. So the idea is that keep doing what you're doing on the build and test side. That's great. Even on the packaging side, utilize a package manager or utilize something where you can push out distributions. That's fine. We'll utilize registries, etc. But when it comes to continuous delivery and deployments, that's really where you want to utilize Octopus, because we give you all the capabilities that we'll touch on in this webinar. The targets themselves will be the targets themselves. So there'll be things like hybrid environments, cloud environments, on-prem. It really doesn't matter. We support all of them. And so you can do deployments in a fast and easy manner. The thing that's also important to mention on this slide is we also support integrations. So we are very cognizant, aware, and respect the fact that we don't live in a bubble. We live in an ecosystem of great world-class solutions. So, we're fans of GitHub, for example. We're fans of other solutions as well. We want to make sure we work well with those solutions. And so you see a lot of integration points between us and other people. So folks like the great folks over at ServiceNow, or Slack, or Jira, or GitHub, or GitLab, or Azure DevOps, or TeamCity. These and other sort of solutions are all part of an integrated pipeline. We talk to all of them and allow you to integrate as part of that solution going forward. Given this kind of an example here, like a lot of folks are using GitHub, so that makes sense. Here's an example of what it might look like in a scenario of GitHub. So at the top, we have code commits done through VS Code. Maybe we're using Git code spaces. I don't know. You can utilize our Copilot extension, so you can actually talk to an Octopus instance through Copilot. You can ask it questions utilizing AI, which is great. We're one of the first third-party vendors to support this extensibility model. Those will then go into a repository hosted on GitHub. You'll utilize a combination of GitHub Actions or GitHub Apps, both of which we support. And then you'll utilize this in the form of a container registry. And after that, it's the same seamless experience. So it really doesn't matter too much where you're making your code commits, etc. We'll integrate with that as part of the scenario. All right, that's enough talk. Let's go into a demo. So this is the part that everyone wants to see. All right, so jumping into my environment here. So I'll jump into the root level here. I was testing out something here, so we'll just skip that part. Oh, undergoing maintenance. Oh no! All right, this is always a fun part of the demo, where my maintenance of my instance is underway. So let's see if we can actually hit a different instance. This will be fun. Let's see if we can actually do this. This is live demo, folks. So there you go. We do roll out updates to different instances. So I'll go ahead and hit a different instance. This is our demo instance. By the way, you can hit this one yourself. This is at demo.octopus.app. Just turns out my personal instance was being updated. So there you go. It'll be nice to see on the recording. I'll send that to the engineers. Thanks. So anyways, what you're seeing here, this is Octopus Deploy, the dashboard. The dashboard is sort of your single pane of glass or your one-stop shop. Let me go ahead and make this full screen so you get a better sense of what this looks like. So this is your one-stop shop or single pane of glass for everything relative to your deployments that are hosted inside of Octopus Deploy. So you can see here I have my projects listed. Projects are the way in which we group our various deployments. So a project can typically have a one-to-one relationship with an application, but it doesn't have to be that way. You can have an application that may be comprised of like a web server, a database, etc. But essentially, it is a way of defining a series of not only rules and deployment processes, but also variables, etc. So you can see these are all projects here listed on the left-hand side. And if we take a look at one of these, for example, so let's take a look at, say, like a home loan portal. Let's say I'm working for a bank. If I drill into this one, you'll see I have a bunch of releases that have been shipped. Across the top here, I have my environments, and these have been defined ahead of time. You'll define these as part of your first run experience, but essentially what you get is a really clear understanding of what's being deployed and where and why. In some cases, when you look at the audit logs, we'll take a look at that in a sec. But here you can see I have a number of successful deployments that have been occurring. I can promote a deployment, so I can promote it from test to production simply by issuing a deployment itself. And so the dashboard is really nice because it gives you a really powerful means of seeing what has happened where and in which environments. Now, jumping back a little bit, you may wonder like what it is that we're doing in terms of the deployment itself. So if we jump into this process tab here, so you'll see here we have this process tab. We'll talk about this icon in a second here, but what you'll see here is this is my deployment process. So a deployment process, as I said before, is a collection of steps that occur either one after another or in parallel or based on conditions. And this is basically the series of steps that will run to do a deployment. So when I get my package, when I get my source built, etc., I'm ready to go ahead and do a deployment. It will run through these series of steps to do its work. And so this is really, really important to mention here because a lot of people, when they see this, are like, I'm not really quite making the connection here. So how does this work again? So the idea here is that just like most other solutions, you're defining a workflow in a sense. And these steps all encompass various things that you want to do as part of a deployment. So let's take an example here. Let's say I want to modify this existing deployment process. By scrolling up to the top here, I can click on this button here called Add Step. And what this allows me to do is jump into the process editor. So here I'm really getting at the heart of Octopus. This is really where I define my deployment process. So here you can see in my well here, I have the series of steps that define my deployment process. And over on the right-hand side here, it says add a step template. What I'm doing here is I'm basically adding additional steps to my existing process. And you'll notice in here, we have a whole host of different steps that I can use. We have a series of featured steps. These are common ones that most folks will use. So if you're deploying to Kubernetes, for example, I may want to deploy a Helm chart or execute some YAML configuration. I may want to use a tool like Customize, which is great for doing deployments to Kubernetes clusters. Our most popular one is run a script. So this is by far the most popular one. And this is sort of like, let me take the wheel, I'll drive sort of step. But you'll notice here we have steps for things like Terraform. We have steps for AWS. We have steps for Azure. We have also a whole series of steps that have been built by the community. So if there's a step that we don't have that isn't built out of the box, you can simply just go over to this section here called Community Steps. And these are over 570 steps that have been delivered by the community for a wide variety of solutions. So you can see here things we have integration with HashiCorp Vault. We have integration with things like GitHub. These and other sorts of steps you can use in concert with your deployment pipeline. And so if you're looking for utilizing these either as part of a deployment pipeline, a process, or you want to use it in the context of what's called a runbook, we'll get to that later, you can certainly do that. So let's go ahead and jump back to our featured section here. Let's go ahead and run a script step. So when you add an individual step to a deployment process, you can see it's been added here at the bottom. So there's my run a script step. I can give this a name. So I can say, give it a name like, hello, Octopus 101. And you can see it's been reflected there. So the run a script step is basically that. It's just like, give me a placeholder for some script that I'll write and I'll execute in the context of a deployment pipeline. Why you may want to do this could be for a variety of reasons. May I want to execute a CLI? I may want to write some custom code. I may want to reach out to an HP endpoint and conduct a service call. There's any number of things that I can do with this. Inside our step configuration, you'll notice that we have a lot of configuration values that we can manipulate. These are sort of the knobs and buttons and switches we can manipulate to control how this step executes. So all these properties that you see here, these are all individual properties for this particular step. So if I jump to another step here, you'll see that it has different properties associated with it. So as I navigate between each step, they all have different types of properties, and this allows me to control what's happening. So if we navigate back to run a script step, you can see here, the first thing it's going to ask me is, okay, where is this script source coming from? Is it going to be defined as an inline script? Is it going to come from a Git repository? Or is it going to be defined inside of a package? So Octopus has this notion of a package repository. It's a built-in repository we have. So you can send us, zip archives, things like that. We'll crack those open, grab a particular script that you want us to grab, and we'll execute that as part of this step. But for this example here, I'll just say run a script that's inline. And down here, you can see I can actually execute inline source code here. I can use PowerShell, I can use Bash, I can use whatever I want. It really doesn't matter what you utilize here. I'll just do a command line hello world sort of thing. As part of defining my scripts here, I can also utilize a whole host of what are called variables. This is really, really powerful. So, if you write your own scripts, you won't have, getting this built the right way is going to be difficult because these things can change between environments. Not only that, when you create a release, you want to make sure those things are snapshotted because you don't want them changing over time necessarily. So these are all the variables that I can access. You can see we have a ton of variables that you can access. And this just uses a mustache notation for injecting values in here. But once I have that utilized here, I can do a bunch of other things as well. I can define where this step will run. I can give it conditions about how and when it should run. I can see whether or not it's part of a rolling deployment. So if I want to control over the number of deployment targets I want to execute this on, I can give it conditions. I can give it triggers. There's all kinds of things I can do. I can do retries. The reason why we add things like this is because obviously we're dealing with possibly networks that are kind of flaky. So you might deal with network latency. And the first time it runs, it doesn't work because it's a timeout. So you can have these retries built in. And this allows you to have more resilient, more robust deployment pipelines. And again, without having this capability built in, you would have to execute this all yourself. Now, earlier I mentioned I was going to talk a little bit about this icon here. One of the things that you can do is you can actually define these things as part of a deployment process. And you'll notice the icon here is Git based, basically. So this is actually underpinned by a Git repository. So you can actually output all these settings to a text file that you host in Git, and then utilize the different branches you have in that repo for basically trying out new capabilities of your deployment pipeline if you want. So we allow you to emit this stuff to Git. Now, you don't have to. By default, we emit it to our own database. But if you want, you can certainly emit this to any Git repository. You can integrate this with GitHub, etc. So there's lots and lots of capabilities for you to use as part of this. So jumping back here to my projects, I'll just discard changes. You can take a look at, we have a bunch of projects here, and we can, obviously through the dashboard, we can take a look at it, promoting these if we so wish. Let's take a look at one here. Let's see if we can just execute one. Here's one called OctoFX. We have a bunch of projects here. And again, you can test these out yourself. We have our samples instance as well as our our demo instance that you can take a look at. So if you take a look at the process here for this is another example of a process that we could play around with. So this one is utilizing a variety of steps here. So this is what we call a manual intervention. Manual intervention means go grab a human, and they're the ones you have to approve manually. That's why we call it manual. They have to check to see whether or not this deployment can succeed. In fact, let's go ahead and execute this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a release for this. It doesn't matter what happened after that manual intervention. We'll just go ahead and see what happens when we create a release. So a release, I mentioned this earlier, is a snapshot of all the stuff that went into creating a deployment. So it's versioned. You can have this auto-incremented, by the way, but it has packages associated with it. So these are the packages that went into this application. So I have a bunch of DLLs in this example here. This is based on .NET. Could be anything here, it doesn't matter. But I have a bunch of packages I want to use. I can select various packages here. I can give it a version number if I want as part of this release. I don't have to choose latest if I don't want to. I'll go ahead and click save. And then it will ask me, okay, when do you want to execute this release, or when do you want to do this release deployment here? So it will give me a series of environments that I can do it to. It will give me release notes. These are associated with the commits that have been done against my Git repository. So these are actually coming from the build information that we incorporate as part of this. In addition to that, I also have my packages. I have all the variables that go into this. So I can show the snapshot of variables here. So we have a bunch, I mentioned those variables earlier. We snapshot all those variables because we want those to be consistent. because we want to also effectively do rollbacks very quickly as well as part of this. So there's a lot of reasons why you want to snapshot variables. You want to keep things consistent, because if things change dynamically, they don't often work. So this is why we actually do snapshots as part of this. And then I can choose to, if I so wish, I can do a deployment to development. Now, if I go ahead and do that, you'll see it actually come out as a release like this. And so you can see the releases that have been done. I can take a look at a previous release here, for example. I can also take a look at other deployments that have been done. So this gives me the ability to drill into each one of them. And the nice thing about this is once it's been done, I get an audit log of everything that's happened. So if I had clicked on deploy to development or production, I would have seen this task summary be displayed. So this is a series of steps that I've run. I get a task log of everything that's been executed. And you'll notice that, we get a running dialogue essentially of everything that's occurred as each step is occurring. So I get to see all the audit trail, the log entries that are made. And this allows me to give really good ability to debug these if they go wrong, if I need to. In addition to that, if I'm doing deployments to things like Kubernetes clusters, I see a live object status here. So I can see the pods, I can see the services that are provisioned as part of this. I can see their health. I can also take a look at the history of the release as well. Who did these changes and why, for example? So I can see here that some of these were automatically triggered via GitHub Actions. Others may have been triggered by a system admin, for example, or by an individual. I can also take a look at changes. So this traceability, this auditability, if such a word exists, gives me a capability that allows me to answer the questions: why did this happen, and when did this happen, and what changes were made? All right, so essentially that is Octopus in a nutshell, from the perspective of what it looks like in the context of a deployment. Great. All right, so let's go ahead and jump back to the slides. And that is a very, very quick, high-level demo, but you get the idea. Again, if you have any questions at all, happy to answer them here in terms of anything you see. So just to kind of recap, I'm going to go into another demo, so don't worry. We'll show some other demos as part of this, but just to provide a recap, the deployment process, which is really the heart of Octopus Deploy, is defined as a series of steps. Now, these steps this is visually represented here, obviously. They can include conditions, as well as we have support for child steps and parallel execution. So it's kind of like a tree view, or a tree execution of the steps that go as part of your workflow for doing a deployment. We have integrated Markdown-based notes. This is important, obviously, because Octopus is probably going to be the hub of all your deployments. You have multiple teams utilizing it to do deployments, and so you want to articulate what these steps are doing and why to other team members if they're reading them. So that's the reason why we have integrated notes. As I mentioned before, we have the support for parallel execution. So we can certainly execute steps in parallel, and this allows me to get better throughput as part of my deployment process. We also have environment labels. So you'll notice here it says staging. If you can't read that, it says staging here. What that means is essentially this step will only run against those environments that are labeled as such. So I can actually have very flexible deployment processes occur as part of my deployment pipeline. So I don't have to have every step run against every environment. I can select which environments I want my deployment processes to occur. And so these and other capabilities turn out to be really, really nice. Now, kind of getting back to the whole why would I use this, I want to take a moment here and talk about some of the other aspects of Octopus that are really, really nice and built out of the box. And again, this is really the reasons why you start utilizing a tool like Octopus. So first and foremost, Octopus is all about reliable and risk-free deployments with integrated rollback capabilities. So the ability to roll back turns out to be pretty important, especially when deployments go wrong. And it may not necessarily be a deployment. It may actually be a bug in your code that got through testing and QA, and you need to roll back changes. You can quickly and easily do that with Octopus. It's built in out of the box, and it's really, really easy to revert changes as part of a system or pipeline that utilizes Octopus at its center. In addition to that, we also include a capability called runbooks. Runbooks are essentially similar to deployment processes. They're a series of steps that you'll execute, but they're targeted more to that ops side of DevOps. So typically in DevOps, you have the developer audience, and you have the operations audience, and they are kind of amalgamated together into this group. The ops side of it with most CD or CI tools is often forgotten. So what we support is this capability called runbooks, which allow you to essentially execute any maintenance or emergency operations you want to run as part of your release strategy. This turns out to be really important, especially if you need to do rollbacks, or you need to provision servers, or you want to go ahead and do maintenance tasks. And the reason why this is super powerful is because oftentimes these are done by folks who are on pager duty who don't have rights to touch those servers. But if you set these things up in advance with the correct credentials and rights, etc., none of which they can see, they can just simply run these runbooks and execute the ability to bring back servers if they've fallen over, or you can do backups, etc. So it's a really powerful mechanism built into Octopus that allows you to do these operations. Again, if you're doing anything with containers, whether you're hosting these via Docker or Kubernetes, etc., we support YAML, we support Helm charts. We have a bunch of extensibility capabilities in there. You don't have to break out your ruler and handcraft YAML if you don't want to, but we certainly support that as part of it. And also, and this is a part of the Octopus 101 that we don't touch on a lot, but I'll mention it here. A really powerful capability of Octopus is support for what is called multi-tenancy. So the idea here is that maybe I'm developing software and I've got that software running in different parts of a country. And because of those different geos and the different rules associated with them, maybe I want different versions of that application deployed to different types of people in different parts of the country. So let's say I'm in the US, or actually for our European audience, let's say I'm in England, and I want to have Northern England and Southern England represented differently in terms of tenants. So Northern England gets one version of an app, Southern England gets a different version of the app. I may want to utilize multi-tenancy for that. That's a built-in capability of Octopus. What it allows you to do is basically set up or establish these things called tenants, and then you can deploy different versions of your apps to that. The other way of doing this, by the way, is you have to build this into the app itself. So, oftentimes people will build in multi-tenancy into the app itself based on roles, etc. You don't have to do that with multi-tenancy in Octopus. It's simply built in the box, so you can actually deploy different versions of the app accordingly. Really powerful capability. And of course, it wouldn't be part of a pipeline list. Of course, there was compliance, risk, and auditing as part of it. So Octopus basically writes down and audits every step that is executed. You see not only everything that's happening against the system, but you get a log of everything that's occurring in terms of your deployments. In addition to that, we have integration with things like Splunk and also Sumo. For if you want to stream that out to a third party, you can certainly do that. These aren't the limit of all the integrations we have, by the way. We have tons and tons of integrations. I'll show you a page that you can actually check out if you want. And we also have integration with things like Jira Service Desk or Jira Service Management and ServiceNow. If you want to have an ability to control through service requests when a release is issued, so you want Octopus to serve at the behest of, say, of ServiceNow. So a change request goes through ServiceNow. Once it's approved, then we'll go ahead and do the deployment. That is something you can certainly do as part of this integration. So that's a really, really powerful capability. All right, let's jump back into another demo. For the integration stuff, I'll just show you. We have a location you can check out. There's a couple of locations you can check out. This one seems to be timing out on my end. Go to library.octopus.com. Hopefully it works on your end. It's just a little bit flaky on my end. I think my internet's been a bit flaky today. One of the sections you can check out is our library, which gives you a series of steps. That's one aspect you can check out. The other one we have, I believe it's /integrations. If you take a look at this will give you a series of integrations that we support. So I mentioned earlier ServiceNow, Jira Service Management, Splunk, Sumo, etc. If you go through here, you can see we have just tons and tons and tons of integrations. So if you want to get a sense of where things lie in terms of, let's say you've got your favorite product du jour that you want to integrate with, you can check it out here at /integrations. All right, let's jump back into a demo. Unfortunately, my instance is down. That's fine. We'll just forge on ahead. So we'll jump back to our demo instance here, and you can see we also have a series. This is another capability we have built in out of the box called spaces. So in addition to groups, you have this concept of spaces. If you want to segment apart where these things are actually stored, you can actually break them apart based on a space itself. So the reason why I mention this is because I'm going to jump into a different space here, so I can jump into something like this space here. I can take a look at different projects that are listed here. If I take a look at a project like this, I can take a look at its deployment process. Now the question that comes up often is like, okay, well, that's great. I'm doing a lot of manual stuff here. Where's the automation, right? Like, I thought you said this was all about getting a deployment process, and like that's an automated thing. You're right. So this is kicked off through an automation, like for example, through GitHub. So here I am in GitHub. This is a repo. The repo is not important. The code that's in here is not terribly important. What matters is the integration with Octopus. So oftentimes you'll find There's a special location in a lot of these things. So in GitLab or GitHub, there's a special name folder. In GitHub, it's this one. It's .github/workflows. This is where you define your workflows for GitHub Actions. You can see I have a bunch of YAML files defined here. This is where I'm defining my CI process. So I can do this through what's called a workflow dispatch. It allows me to basically click a button at the top right-hand corner and just execute this if I want. But I can also trigger these based on, pull requests, etc. Once this is kicked off, a series of steps will occur. So the taxonomy for this is pretty similar. Most of these workflow engines have the similar taxonomy, like they're called steps and jobs and things like that. We have a similar mechanism. But essentially what we're doing here is we're running a series of GitHub actions. So these are all individual actions. If you haven't seen this before, this is basically YAML. And each one of these is an action, a GitHub action. So this is an action here. This is our checkout action. This is an action here called setup.net. So this allows you to set up the runner for GitHub Actions with an environment for doing compilation of .NET projects. So this is what you'll set up if you're wanting to compile this and you're writing C# or something like that. You may want to execute a CLI process like .NET restore. This is an individual just run command. This isn't using GitHub Actions at all. But I mentioned all this because the integration with Octopus comes down here later, where you can see we have a series of actions that we have built for GitHub for doing things like create release or deploy release or create a tenanted release or push packages to Octopus. These and other sorts of things you can certainly do in the context of a deployment pipeline. Now, if you want to check out what these look like, if you go to github.com/marketplace, you'll see a page that looks like this. You can simply do a search here for Octopus. I have a bit of a cough, so I'm just going to take a sip of water. Much better. Sorry, my kids are in school and they're bringing back everything. Everyone's sick in my home right now. So you can see we have a bunch of GitHub actions here. So we have actions for installing this Octopus CLI. We have actions for running runbooks or creating releases or creating a zip package. These and other steps we can do. I think we have about 12 actions so far in the GitHub Marketplace. So you can simply utilize these as part of your pipeline, and you can perform operations against Octopus. Now, you can also, if you so wish, use our GitHub app. Apps are a bit of a different animal. Apps are a bit different in the sense they're pre-configured, and they have an established trust between GitHub and Octopus ahead of time. So you don't need API keys and all that. But what you do need is you need to install this and make it available as part of your process. We also have an integration here with GitHub Copilot, but that's just an extension for utilizing GitHub Copilot if you want to see. But we have lots of stuff there. So search for Octopus in the GitHub Marketplace and you'll find us there. Anyways, getting back to our YAML, this is where we actually integrate with Octopus. So you can see here we're actually pushing a series of packages. Those packages, remember, when you do a build, you generate a bunch of stuff. There's binaries that you're going to generate. Those are packages. You can push those any number of locations. You can push those to Artifactory. You can push those to NuGet. You can push them anywhere you want. Or you can push them up to us. We have a built-in repository that you can use. Once they're there, you can use them for doing deployments, which is perfect for that sort of capability. Now, I'll jump back into my Octopus instance, which is here. And what I'll do is I'll show you where all that stuff lives. So down here in the bottom, there's this section here for things like accounts, build information, a lot of stuff we haven't talked about yet, but I'll just show you here this one thing. External feeds is where you define where packages come from. So you can see we already have one defined here for Azure DevOps, but if I wanted to, I can certainly set up other ones as well. We have a wide variety of feed types that you can support, Artifactory, etc. NuGet. Once you set these things up, you'll be able to utilize them in part of a deployment pipeline. So that's where those things live. But essentially, when I'm utilizing this in concert with a pipeline, that's how these things work. You can use this with TeamCity. We have integrations with TeamCity. We have integrations with, let's see, the TeamCity Marketplace. You go to the TeamCity Marketplace, or plugins rather, the JetBrains Marketplace. You can see we're the #1 integration here. And you simply enable this inside of TeamCity. And then you can utilize the integration there as part of that. We have integrations with BuildKite. We have integrations with Jenkins, GitLab, name a CI process. We probably Azure DevOps. So we integrate with all of them. And essentially what that does allow you to create releases, deploy them, etc. as part of a CI process. That being said, you don't have to explicitly trigger these deployments through an automation. you can simply have them appear if a new package appears in one of your feeds. So you can have automated deployments occurring if you have an updated package in a feed. So we have the ability to subscribe to feeds and get updates for those sorts of things. So those are some of the ways in which you can do deployments as part of this. Now, I realize a lot of this stuff's technical. I apologize for that if you're not a technical person, but this is how we hang things together. The important aspect to all of this, though, is that once it's configured, it's often a set and forget sort of thing. You just set it up and away you go. Now you've got continuous delivery occurring. In addition to that, though, which is important, you want to make sure that you're utilizing the capabilities you want to leverage, like rollbacks, environment promotions, tenants, etc. These are other things you'll set up as part of your installation. I mentioned earlier deployment targets. We support hybrid, cloud, on-prem, etc. Here's an example of how we can define some of these. I'm utilizing an instance here, which I may not have rights to, so I'm just going to jump back here to this other space. I want to see how I can, yeah. So you can see I have rights here. So this is this button I want to click here. So I can add my own deployment targets if I so wish. I can set these up in advance. And you can see here are some examples of deployment targets we support. So we support Kubernetes, we support Linux, Windows, Mac, Azure, AWS. We have this notion of cloud regions, which is like a sort of an ephemeral sort of region that we can stand up if you want to use. We can also define environments as part of this as well. But essentially, this is how you establish your deployment targets. And then you can map those to different environments accordingly. So you can see here are my environments that I have. And I have each one of those has their own targets that I want to deploy to. And those will be used in concert with the deployment process. Awesome. All right. Just quickly jumping to, I want to make sure that you guys get your questions answered. So there's a question here. See if I can read it. It says, hello, as a DevOps engineer, I wonder if I can use Octopus Deploy to provision AWS infrastructure from the scratch using Terraform from my Git source, Bitbucket. I need to provision VPC EKS cluster. And the answer to this is yes, you can. Let's take a look at how you can do this. Thank you. This wasn't a plant, by the way, so I don't know this person, but this is something you can definitely do. So the way you might do this is two ways. You can either do that as part of a deployment process. So if we jump back into my project here and we take a look at, I'll just take one here. It's an arbitrary one. What I can do is I can, as part of my process here, I can jump in here, I can add a step. And the step I want to add is Terraform. So we integrate with Terraform as part of this. I've got a little bit of an error here. Well, don't worry about that for now. It's just a setup thing. But I can actually apply a Terraform template if I wanted to. And so I can run a HCL, define HCL, execute as part of a configuration. I can do this as part of a deployment process. Or if I wanted to, I can do this as part of a runbook. So either option is fine, and you can certainly do that. And you can define that location of that HCL file coming from any number of locations. So, so if we take a look at the settings here, you can see I'm setting up a step here to run or execute a Terraform template. If you've never used Terraform before, don't worry about it. It's basically a means of standing up infrastructure through text files. It's a really nice technology, but essentially it allows you to define these configuration files. Now, the question becomes, if I've got this, in your question you said, I've got using Terraform from my Git source. So I've got Bitbucket set up. So here I could say, I want to use a Git repository. And the reason why is because that's where my template's going to come from. So I'm going to point this at Bitbucket. That's where my config is going to come from. I'm going to run that as part of my deployment process or runbook to then config to stand up my infrastructure via Terraform. So the answer to this question is absolutely. Yes, you can totally do this. Thank you for your question. Again, not a plant. Awesome. Okay, so that was a great question, by the way. It allowed me to kind of tap dance there, which is always fun. So there you go. All right, jumping back to the slides. All right, so you saw a lot. I don't want to waste your time here. We typically run these, anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes. We're at the 45-minute mark, so there you go. So what you saw in this webinar, very high level, how Octopus works, why you should use it, right? Talked a little bit about DIY, shadow CD. You don't want to get into that world. It's gnarly, it's headache prone, and you become less of a developer and more of a maintenance junkie if you do that. Things get really gnarly, especially as you scale. Octopus is all about scaling with your organization as you build up your deployments. We talked about Octopus fundamentals, namely things like projects, deployment processes, releases, etc. Showed you how to do a deployment process as well as extend it. And then I showed you very briefly how to integrate this with a CI process like GitHub Actions. Again, this is just scratching the surface. You can learn a lot, certainly, from our docs. We also have our YouTube channel, which you can check out as well. And in addition to that, we also have our homepage. So if you go there, you're going to see this big purple button at the top called Try It Free. If you click on that button, you'll be able to provision your own instance for free trial of Cloud, Octopus Cloud, which is our hosted instance of Octopus. You can set it up, you can bang away on it, break anything you want, and get a sense of what it looks like. You can, if you so choose, also download and install this on your own infra if you want. So if you go to our download section, you'll see we have a download button for downloading Octopus Server, which you can certainly do so and run yourself. We have other other downloads there, including our CLI. We have other downloads you can check out as well. There's our integration with Azure DevOps, TeamCity, etc. So there's lots of stuff there. Awesome. So don't forget, octopus.com. Let it be your homepage, if not a bookmark, but definitely check it out and set up a free trial, which is always, always important. I mentioned earlier our YouTube channel. That is also a resource you can use. We have tons of videos there. We are streaming to YouTube right now, so you can check that out also accordingly. And our docs are amazing. We have tons of videos. We have tons of explainers. We kind of walk you through step by step how to set all this stuff up. But once you get this stuff going, you're going to be addicted. It's a great way to do deployments. Allows you to imagine. It's now a headache it's now something off your mind. You're doing continuous delivery very easily with all the capabilities built in that you know and love. Awesome. All right, checking out the question queue. I don't see any more questions. Again, this is live. Yeah, that's all we have for questions. Great. So anyways, thanks a lot for attending. I really appreciate it. We do these monthly. Sorry, I forgot to mention that again. You can go to /webinars, which is on our website. You'll see a site that looks like this. If you go to /webinars, you can sign up for our other webinars. We will have these again running next month if you want to see me kick the tires again. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, just contact support. We're always happy to help. We've got world-class support. But in the meantime, download a trial. We'd love to see you be successful with your deployments. Anyways, on behalf of everyone here at Octopus Deploy, on behalf of us to all of you, happy deployments, and hopefully we'll see you on a future webinar soon. Take care.